Okay, so I'm going to start with a quick recap of where we left things last episode. So last episode, they realized that the killer was killing people on Christian holidays. So they looked at the next Christian holiday is the Feast of Ascension, and they said, look, we're going to do a sting. We're going to take this poor boy, we're going to dress him up like one of these boy prostitutes, and we're going to try to use this to lure the killer, and then we can catch him. Now, this doesn't work. One of the people, his name's Cyrus, that works for Kreizler, he actually ends up getting shot. And then what happens coincidentally somewhere else is Connor, who's been kicked off the police force, he's kind of in a volatile state. He ends up getting mad and shooting William Van Bergen, Van Burton, whoever the guy with the actual silver smile. So the whole thing about syphilis and having the silver smile, that ended up being a red herring because Willem, Willie, is not the killer. And it turns out he says at one point he's part of the 400. Now what this means is, I looked it up, apparently there was a big socialite in New York during this period, and she would, not in this period, back in the day, early starting of New York, and she would have these great balls. And her ballroom, it would fit 400 people, and she would only have the most exclusive parties with the most powerful people. So whoever the most powerful 400 people were, they would get invited and fit in the ballroom, and they would be called the 400. So anyways, he gets killed, Willie, and turns out he's not the killer, though it's someone else, and the killer escapes. Also, Kreizler ends up slapping Sara because Sara starts really poking at buttons that he doesn't want poked, so he ends up just slapping her. So that's where he ended last episode, and now we start this episode where they're asking this poor kid who was part of the sting operation, because he actually ended up seeing the killer and interacting with him, to draw. And it's a weird drawing, a very ominous drawing, I'll show it behind me, that we end up seeing. And Kreizler and John continue to bicker back and forth. We'll get more to them later, but we'll move. The first big thing that happens is they're looking at the new body, because there was, so 3 things happened, 4 things happened, 5 things happened, a bunch of things happened last episode, but one thing happened is that after he got away from the sting operation, the killer, he killed a new victim. So they're examining this new victim. We see similar things that we've seen before. We've seen eye gouging, genital gouging, but now we see also scalping. And Theodor Roosevelt, which is funny because Roosevelt really didn't like Native Americans at all. He says some horrible things about Native Americans. He says, "Oh, this looks like, stuff I've seen out in the West, in the frontier." And so this is their first clue. And eventually they realized that it probably wasn't an actual person who's Native American, because they wouldn't do it to a child. They would usually do it to adversaries, people, warriors they would respect. Someone probably saw it and experienced it, but was not part of the culture, but was around it, and now is kind of doing it, but not really understanding why they would do it. Because they would do it because they thought if you cut out someone's eyes, they wouldn't be able to make the journey to the paradise after they die, so they would just have to sadly stay on Earth and be kind of this spirit floating around blind. Or they would cut off someone's genitals, because then when they went to paradise, they'd be in paradise, which I guess is cool, but they wouldn't be able to use their genitals, because however your body is when you die, apparently that's the same form you have in the afterlife, or at least some tribes believe that. So anyways, they're examining this body. Everyone else leaves but Kreizler, and just when I think Kreizler can't get any lower, he hits a new level of just depravity and insanity. I don't understand what's going on with Kreizler. There's something amiss. He sees this dead body, and he's like, well, perfect time to get inside the mind of the killer, see what he sees, feel what he feels, and he plunges his knife, I guess, into the boy's stomach, as if, let me try to feel, let me try to get that high that the killers must get, and that Cyrus and everyone else I work for, they talk about this high and how great it is to kill someone. Let me see if I can experience that. Weird behavior from Kreizler. And then we get this great scene of Byrne. Now, he's the guy with the prominent mustache. He used to be the head of the police. He's yelling at Connor, who's now... So neither of them are even a member of the police at this point. They really shouldn't be so involved in this ongoing murder investigation. But Byrne is yelling at Connor for killing Willie. And this, because he's a rich person, this is a no-no. Byrnes seems to say, look, he understands how things work in the town, that you have to play by the rich people's rules, and that's the only way that you get any kind of semblance of justice and dignity. So he's really mad at Connor for upsetting this balance. And Connor, he's being all evasive. And you know how when you take a drink of water, when you're lying and you kind of want to stall, he's Irish, so he's the stereotypical Irish stock character. So instead of water, he just takes this big, big swig of liquor in the pub, and he has two tells. This is one tell to show that he's lying. The other is he'll turn up the Irish accent at other points where he's been lying to people. Suddenly the Irish just really comes out in his voice. And then we get this carriage ride with John, Kreizler, and then the pimp, or the head of the brothels, this gangster guy. His name's Paul, technically. Probably not really worth committing to memory. Anyways, what's happening is they finally, after all these children, these brothel children dying, I guess they close the brothels, and people are very mad about that. So finally, I guess people aren't that mad about all these unsolved murders, but once the brothels close, now everyone's mad. They're mobbing, they're rioting. Mobs are rioting. People don't really mob. So what happens is they're having this conversation with this brothel owner, and a very interesting thing comes out. It turns out that Kreizler wrote an article called "The Harm We Visit Upon Our Children is Visited on Us When They Grow Up," or something along those lines. But it's very interesting because it might be a foreshadow to how Kreizler's dad caused whatever's going on with his arm. And now Kreizler, this kind of damaged him, and now Kreizler, in return, is kind of committing damage on the world around him, just by Kreizler being Kreizler. So I thought that was interesting foreshadowing to maybe Kreizler's troubled upbringing. We know it's not a birth defect, how his arm got like that. Maybe it was some kind of parental abuse. And then we get to the point where John, he's drinking at the bar and he gets chloroformed. I've lost count of the number of times John is just getting knocked out. He takes a beating on this series, so John gets chloroformed. I love the shot of the barkeep just cleaning his glass, glances over, goes back to cleaning the glass like it's no big deal. So John wakes up in the carriage, sees Kreizler. Kreizler's such a lunatic at this point. For all we know, Kreizler could, at this point, say, yeah, I'm the killer. I knocked you out and I'm going to torture you now because I don't like our little rivalry with Sara. But Kreizler's not. I guess Kreizler, it's unclear if he got chloroformed as well or if he was just invited and for some reason John was only one. But it turns out J.P. Morgan set this up. So J.P. Morgan, really a famous guy, probably second after Rockefeller, famous old Americans. Now, why he knocked them out is unclear because what it turns out is that J.P. Morgan actually wants them to solve this murder, or at least pin it on someone. He wants someone to go to jail for all these murders. He wants the whole matter put to bed because all he cares about is business. All he cares about is people being docile, and he doesn't like the mobs. He doesn't like this unrest. So he goes to Kreizler and says, "Look, I'll help you solve the crime. Just put this to bed so we can keep going business as usual." Kreizler rejects the help, and again, maybe he rejects the help because they were chloroformed. It's unclear why he chloroformed them and didn't just invite them. I guess he really wanted them to show up, or he wanted to send a message about how powerful he is and you shouldn't cross them. I didn't really think it made sense. And we get a very funny line from John when he sees Connor, who's one of the people that's kidnapped him. He just rubs salt in the wound. He says, "Where's your uniform? I thought you were a police officer." Connor's already smarting from losing his uniform, so very funny. I don't know if John intended that or not. So now we get to Sara. Now, Sara, first of all, the imagery of her going to this women's asylum, I thought it was excellent. This is one of my favorite aspects of these old kind of gothic horror period pieces. Now, you see, first of all, the fat kind of big male jailer, and then you see the women just sitting in chairs all lined up and just shackled to these chairs, and you see their hair just ratty with disuse. I don't know if they ever get to leave those chairs, how much they just have to stay in those chairs, and one of them is shaking in the chair, the other is like, "I'm not crazy, help me." It was just very shocking image, and again, probably maybe a little exaggerated about what it was actually like before we had better attitudes toward mental illness, but maybe not too much of a stretch. And through Sara's investigation, she gets the name Rudolph Bunzel. So he has a history of abusing children, which makes sense because it's children being targeted now. He fought Native Americans for the government in the West and then had to come back with some kind of PTSD and was treated at the government hospital there. So they think he's a likely culprit, and that's our big suspect at the moment. And again, he's a suspect because the new body was scalped, but the actual native tribes that do it, they wouldn't do it to a child, but someone who was around them and saw them do it, they would know that it's not supposed to be done to a child, so that's why he's their suspect. Now we get this great scene where Sara tells John that Kreizler hit her last episode, but they handled it great, where Sara, first of all, she just says one of Kreizler's quotes, one of many of Kreizler's dark, disturbing quotes. Anyone is capable of violence if put in extreme circumstances or something along those lines. And then he asks her, what happened. She doesn't say anything, but she's so stoic and steely and reserved always. But here, for the first time, you see her kind of break down and give him a hug. And immediately he knows what's happening and the audience knows. And I just thought very well handled, much better than her just telling John, "Oh, he hit me." It was putting some effort into it I liked. And then we get this great confrontation between John and Kreizler, first of all, I couldn't even call them frenemies at this point. They're just flat out opponents and enemies. They've never really seemed to get along. They've always been at each other's throats. If they were brothers or family, I guess it would make sense, but I still don't understand why they're friends. I wish we got maybe some more scenes of them actually being friends and actually having a back and forth. All I've ever seen is antagonism between them? Huh. Animosity is the word I'm looking for. So they say some really hurtful things to each other, and then John, this is the second time that Kreizler's hurt his feelings. He goes to some seedy part of town, gets drunk, and then is in real danger. So Connor knocks him out. Unclear what's going to happen with him. Now Kreizler, the effect on him is it's unclear whether what John says, that you're going to die alone, whether this freaks him out and motivates him to maybe begin a relationship with someone, and he ends up his one of the people that works for him, Mary, who is another murderer, by the way. I just feel like I have to keep reminding because they just gloss over that. He seems to be starting a relationship with her. So it'd be interesting to see how that affects Sara, how that affects John, because John seemed to be kind of throwing some attention her way as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now we'll get to Kreizler, and I'm just gonna try to talk about Kreizler a bit because I don't know what's going on with him. Now, what's Kreizler's personality? What have we seen from him so far? There's a kind of arrogance, a kind of condescension, know-it-all, always thinks he knows best. And it's interesting, it plays up this trope of the very brilliant scientist, especially psychologist, who really understands other people and understands psychology, but has these great blind spots, especially when it comes to himself and his own interactions with people. He also, very callous, very socially insensitive, not socially appropriate, says things that it's just not really appropriate to say. And initially I thought the series, it was just going to be about him being this hero who revolutionized social psychology, who revolutionized psychology and profiling, and was just this great historical figure that solved crimes and this kind of Sherlock Holmes. But he's a really complex character, and I really like it. I love the scene where he's apologizing because the niece of the person who got injured, Cyrus, that person who works for him, another murderer, he's apologizing to Cyrus, and it's not clear that Cyrus really needs or deserves an apology, but what's interesting is just how hard it is for Kreizler to say the words, "I'm sorry," and you see him just struggling to even get those words out, and it's just kind of one trait of narcissism where it's just very hard to admit you're wrong, very hard to say sorry. So it's interesting that Kreizler has these traits. Be interesting to see where it ends up taking this. So I'll end the video there. My favorite scene, probably when Kreizler, he's trying to play piano like he used to, but he can't, and he's just in frustration, just banging. I didn't pay close enough attention. I think it's his stomp against the keys, obviously not really having the desired effect. And it was just this great scene of just impotence and frustration. And like I say, I don't know what exactly they're doing with Kreizler, but I like it. And I think it's very interesting and really elevates the show into actually really interesting show that I'm very excited to see where they go with it.